There is a question that can legitimately be raised or asked regarding the maturity process that we've been describing. And that question is, if you're supposed to use your brain, if you're supposed to use your seichel to adjust your moods and your responses to be appropriate to each situation, does that mean that you're not meant to have a personality? And I think the question requires a little bit of focus because to the extent that a person's personality creates a bias, then the answer is correctly no, you should not have a personality. You should work to eliminate your personality. You're not supposed to have a bias based on your quirks, based on the quirks that you have wired into you from birth. Those quirks that are not universal. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was very clear about that. We don't get rid of those tendencies that are universal. A person will always have love for his son, and no matter what, no matter how, if there's a burning building and as close as he might be to his student, he's going to grab his child out of the burning building before he grabs the student, and that is not meant to be tampered with. That's not something that is considered a corrupting bias. But assuming that we're talking about biases that are based on the quirks of mood and tendency, so in an ideal development, in an ideal evolution of a person, he would have access to all of the parts of himself so that he's able to rejoice at a simcha and he's able to cry at a time of tsar, Rahman al-Itzlan, and he's able to be firm with students and he's able to be compassionate with students as the need arises. He is able to be appropriate. And so it would seem as though it would homogenize all people who are developing, who are evolving. It would seem as though, in theory, they would homogenize. And the world doesn't go along with that. Like, that seems impossible. That seems ridiculous. But I think Rabbi Yisrael Salanter writes that it needs to be understood a little bit more in depth. And that is, there is a core of the person that is more foundational than his quirks. A person who just happens to have a short fuse and gets angry all the time, so anger is not part of his foundation. Anger is one of those bad midos that he has either by birth or how he developed. And he needs to learn to overcome that. But that does not mean that there may not be a certain element of kipeda that sits at his core. It's unlikely that the person who's angry has anger sitting at his core. That's a very unlikely combination. The likelihood is that he needs to deal with his anger and then discover what's at his core. And he was really irritated, if you will. He really was speaking out against those who claimed that Shammai was not such a nice guy and Hillel was a nice guy. So they had he was a good personality and he was a not such a good personality. It's ridiculous on many levels, not the least of which is that the Shammai is the one who told us, having mikabelis kol adam, that we're supposed to receive every person graciously. It's not. It's a misread to assume that one was a nice guy and one was not such a nice guy. However, it is correct to say that when a person will strip away by dint of the strength of his seichel, and he will strip away the petty tendencies, he will, in the end of the day, be unique. Keshem shepartzufeim shonos, kach deoseim shonos. We are unique individuals, and we will, in the end of the day, contribute something unique in the world. And it won't be because we just happen to have those quirks. It'll be because we were created for a particular mission in the world. If you find, for example, a student who has a leaning to study Navi or to study Halacha or to study even Kabbalah, and it doesn't fit into the yeshiva world, to the stream. So many great people pointed out, don't squash him. That's not coming because he's lazy, so he doesn't want to apply himself to his learning. It's not because he's just wants to be different than everybody else, and so he strikes out on his own. It's because he's built differently. And we need to recognize that people have a unique contribution to make. Now, this is very delicate because on the one hand, if it's just coming from a desire to be different or a rebelliousness or whatever the case may be, so then you instruct the young man, get over it, work on yourself, get over it. But if you sense that it's not coming from a midah issue, it's coming from his core neshama, then you must make room for that and respect that, because it is part of his unique voice. And so if Hillel and Shammai disagreed, so first of all, they didn't disagree because one was a nice guy and one was a tough guy. It's not because they couldn't overcome their midos. It's because at the core of how they understood a person's avoda, they understood the avoda to be in a certain way, and that, let's say, in the case of Shammai, that kavod haTorah must take precedence, and that dominates the horizon, even if it means that somebody feels as though their toes are being stepped on. And Hillel felt that kavod shamayim is best manifest when a person emulates the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim. And while the Baskol, while the Psak is in favor of Beis Hillel, don't think that in Shamayim, says Rabbi Yisrael, don't think in Shamayim one is getting more scar than the other. The one who is, they are 100% trying to express their neshama's connection to Hashem and what they understand the Torah to want to require of us. In fact, for 3 years they argued. What does it mean for 3 years they argued? It means that they each went over every single proof to either position. They went over every single proof, and they were able to see that proof in light of their position without distorting the proof at all. That means that the Torah sustained both views. And in fact, Hashem was the one who stepped in and said, they're both halalu, halalu, and they are both sacred, and they are both precious. As far as the halacha is concerned, the nod goes to Beis Hillel. There are some who discuss whether or not in the world of truth the nod goes to Beis Shammai. That's not our discussion. The point is that we must not consider that a person's core personality is his quirks. That's a very sad definition of a person's personality. The quirks are things that he's supposed to be ironing out and working out by applying his seichel and straightening himself out. So you say, well, if he does that, then every Talmid Chacham is going to look exactly the same. And the answer is that he won't. And you can be absolutely certain of that, because just as their faces are unique, so too their core contribution in the world is going to be unique. And so it's one of those things that we try to get rid of because that means that we're using our seichel to be able to be appropriate to the situation. But you should know that in the end of the day, there will be those who are more leaning in the direction of chesed, and those who are more leaning in the direction of iyun, and those who are more leaning in this direction and in that. And it does not mean that one is greater than the other. It doesn't mean that one gets more scar than the other. It means that their unique expression in the world is different, and that is guaranteed. We each have a unique contribution. So the question that we started with was, is it true that a maturing person will homogenize, will lose his personality, will lose his uniqueness? And if you would allow me to say, he should try. Yes, he should try to lose his uniqueness. He should get a hold of his quirkiness, and he should try to iron out the quirkiness so that he's increasingly appropriate. And if anybody's worried that he's then going to lose his personality, the opposite is the case. That will allow his core personality to emerge, as opposed to his corrupted personality, which is basically just the quirks that if he would apply a little bit more seichel to, or maybe a lot more seichel to, he would be able to bend them as his seichel appears, and he would be able to bend them to the appropriate situation. And he would never have to say, "Well, I'm just a grump." Well, but now's not the time to be a grump. Now's the time to rejoice with a child, with a student who's just blessed with a child or became a chassan. And you can't say, "Well, that's not my personality." But that doesn't mean that he's going to end up being homogenous. He's going to end up being unique. And it's one of the things that we must have an absolute confidence in. That Keshem Shapratzufeim Shonos, Kach Deoseim Shonos. In the end of the day, you try to get rid of all of your quirks and, so to speak, your uniqueness, and you will discover that your uniqueness will prevail.